fantasy short stories. An Interlude of Intrigue, A Tale of Three Kings, by Lesley Herron. Chapter 8, Dissonance. Oh, my apologies. Reliving what, at the time, I thought were my final moments certainly isn't easy. Of course, when facing one's mortality, things become so much clearer. One such elucidation in that moment was that my brothers weren't going to stop undermining me until my kingdom ended up under the rule of the neighboring three, or the Brotherhood. The wolves of my court were so quick to personify me as a tyrant and label my defense of our borders as wanton bloodshed, by Herron and Lucian's persuasion, no doubt. But where would they be if I had simply let it go, or tried the peaceful route? Well, now we were going to find out. I underestimated my brothers, but what they didn't know was that the council was full of greedy snakes with their own agendas. If only someone had warned them.
You absolutely cannot pull the military presence from Still Harbor!
Pyra let her hand fall away from her face. Since the denouncement of her husband, the regular council meetings had become a never-ending argument over topics that neither side would ever agree on. Around and around they went, squabbling like children, never settling on anything. The abandonment of their biggest port city was the latest in a line of such futile debates. Alderman Laughlin's voice rose lazily from the sea of old men. If we return Still Harbor to the Brotherhood, they have agreed to keep their monks out of Ebonvane. Pyra pinched the bridge of her nose.
It's a strategic military position, and the hub of most of our trade. Abandoning it now would only hurt our country in the long run, not to mention the city's residents. What of their safety?
Lucian answered from her left, sitting on the other side of Herron.
The Brotherhood merely wishes access to the portals, so they may spread the word of their god.
He let out a false chuckle.
Hardly a threat to those who would call Still Harbor home.
He cocked a smile as he turned his head slowly to face her, reveling in the fact that they now sat as equals. Pyra deflated, sinking back into her chair as bickering broke out between the two sides again. She pushed her forehead to her hand and shared a glance with Brune between her fingers. He gave her a sad shake of his head. He likely agreed with her that this would be a never-ending debate. Without warning, the large, heavy wooden doors burst open. The sound of them hitting the stone walls echoed throughout the room. All eyes turned to see one of the guards enter, holding up a wounded soldier with a recently amputated leg. Covered in blood-stained bandages, one of the birdfolk with brilliant feathers and a beaked avian face hobbled to the center of the court with the guard's help. His head hung low. A prickle of fear hit her, and Pyra felt her body respond. The hairs on her arms and back of her neck stood on end as she took in the bloody soldier. His crimson armor told her that he was from the King's Guard. She sent a silent prayer to Thiara when he looked up.
My deepest apologies.
With a dry and cracked voice, the soldier turned his attention away from the Queen to look around the room. He took in a raspy breath.
I arrive with somber news.
The prince, recently numb from the tedium of council meetings, looked up at last. He recognized this man. He felt a dread settle into his chest.
Fort Ironhill is taken. There is nothing left to defend our borders, and tens of thousands of humans and Brotherhood monks now march into Ebra."
The soldier sucked in another wheezing gasp. With a speed that shocked even him, Herron was on his feet.
"What of my brother? Did Elias retreat to safety?"
The birdman remained silent for what felt like eons, struggling to find his words.
"His Highness urged us to flee, but he remained."
The soldier, staring at his lost limb, finally looked up.
"Every soul within the fort fought to the end, even as it burned."
A deafening outcry shook the banners high on the walls of the room. Every member of the court was on their feet, shouting over one another to be heard. Panic visibly rippled through the sea of old men as they grappled with the news. The alderman, head of the council, simply allowed their outbursts and worries to wash over him, waiting patiently with his hands tucked in his lap. There was a deep, shattering sound from within her, and Pyra felt her heart break. She couldn't breathe. It was like suffocating in the crushing depths of the ocean. This wounded and bloody soldier's words were like distant thunder. They seemed meaningless, but terrifying for what was to come. Her mind refused to make sense of it. Through the haze of tears in her eyes, she became aware of the prince on his knees before her, and his hands reaching for hers. The terror written on his face felt genuine, but also ambiguous. Lacing his fingers with hers, Herron felt the words fall from his mouth.
"I never meant..."
Hollow.
I couldn't have known..."
Another lie. Venom coursed through her, and before she could rethink her actions, Pyra tackled the prince, forcing him to the ground. Every tremble in his words was just another deception, and the hammering of her heart turned into a molten pulse in her temple as she dug her fingers into his neck. Tears leaked from her eyes, but her lips were twisted in rage. Herron struggled with the surprise of the Queen's attack and the lack of oxygen reaching his brain. He scrabbled to break her grasp on his neck as colors popped in his vision. His mouth tried to form the words, but nothing came out. Tears were streaming from her face, landing on his cheeks, but she only pressed her thumbs harder into his throat. She may have lost Elias, and her world was shattering around her, but Pyra couldn't stand to hear another tainted word from this man. That was until something collided with the back of her head and caused her grip to falter. She was wrenched from the ground by her hair before she had a moment to recover from the pain, and someone shoved her unceremoniously towards the doors, sending her sprawling down the dais.
"Guards!"
Lucian frantically waved at the two men stationed near the door, who stood awkwardly among the commotion.
"Confine Lady Folkgrave to her quarters, where she may process her loss without attempting to murder anyone else."
He thrust an open hand down in her direction. Numb from the shock and injury, Pyra didn't resist their manhandling as they hauled her to her feet. She couldn't stop the tears, but managed to hold her head up high as she was carried from the room. Alderman Lachlan gave a satisfied,
"As I've said before, womanly hysteria. Unhinged."
He turned to face the fellow members of the court, who nodded in agreement.
"Not even remotely fit for the throne."
Lucian helped Herron to his feet.
"Are you all right, little brother?"
Herron touched the deep scratches she had left in his neck and face without really feeling them. His mind was elsewhere.
"Elias is dead."
He leaned forward.
How?
They may not have grown up together, their sibling bond now brittle as a result, but to say he didn't love his brother dearly would have been a bitter lie. There was a churning roil in his guts, and Herron pushed his fingers against his mouth lest he lose his lunch. He turned to face his eldest brother. "You promised me it would be okay." Lucian put a comforting hand on his shoulder.
There. We warned him, and he knew the risks."
Tears stung the vision in his good eye as Herron looked towards the large wooden doors where the Queen had been hauled away. "She was right." His voice was tiny. "I killed him. I killed my own brother, just like I killed my father."
No. Elias's stubbornness was his own undoing, same as Zelfir's.
Lucian squeezed his arm.
We all knew this day would come. It was the price that needed to be paid in order to usher our country into a new age of peace.
"It needn't have been paid in blood." Herron pulled away sharply, unable to meet his brother's eyes. I need to be alone." His fingers moved to his throat as he all but fled the room. Lucian watched him go with the barest hint of a smile in the corner of his lips. Silence stretched on as a thick, suffocating fog until Brune found the words.
"I move to dismiss for the day. This news affects much, and I think we could all use some time to consider the ramifications."
There was a murmur of general agreement before the council began filtering from the room. Grabbing the alderman by his thin arm, Lucian pulled the old man aside and waited for the court to fully empty. Once alone, he let out a peaceful sigh and closed his eyes.
Silence at last.
The alderman sat his old bones into one of the vacated chairs.
"You seem eager to speak, so please."
He gave a fleeting gesture, encouraging the elf to continue.
"Elias is dead, yes. A sad turn of events indeed."
Lucian pulled a pained expression.
"But consider it a fortuitous gift to your cause. And with the Queen's attempt on the prince's life, you should be able to sway enough of the council to have her dismissed legally from the throne."
He lowered his brows as he looked down, his voice losing its syrupy demeanor.
"You have what you want. Now, I want that which is mine."
"Indeed, I have had a number of gifts land in my lap today." The alderman smiled up at him. "But sadly, you will not be taking the throne." Lucian chuckled dangerously.
"Excuse me?"
"You have orchestrated this situation masterfully, killing your way to the top without ever lifting a sword. But here is the problem. We stripped Elias of his seat because of his thirst for bloodshed and violence. If memory serves, you were removed from your throne long ago by Zelfir for the exact same reason." Lachlan clicked his tongue against his teeth, tutting the elf in a mocking manner. "Your vile assassination of any messengers sent on the king's behalf has proven that you have not changed in the least." A sneer tugged Lucian's smile from his face. He thought enough time had passed to move beyond his father's foolish ideals, but here they were, once again preventing him from having the one thing that was owed to him.
"If not for me, you would still be kowtowing to Brune for scraps."
His voice turned dangerous.
"I put you where you are."
Lachlan turned away from the elf to pluck an imaginary piece of dust off the table. "Indeed, you did. But why, in the scholar's name, would you ever think we would appoint a full-blooded Fae to the throne? Your divine lineage is a stench, an insult to the true God." He turned back. "No, we will settle for Verin. Distasteful as I find even that concession. He is at least half human, easy enough to manipulate, and Brune and his cronies will support the choice." Poison flowed through Lucian's veins as he stared down the little, wrinkled man. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. All his work, all his plotting, and this insignificant human thought he could stand in his way?
"You've seen what happens to those who deny me. Are you certain this is the course of action you wish to take?"
The alderman laughed and pulled himself to his feet, moving towards the door. "Kill me, if you want. It will only further my cause. It doesn't matter that you may cheat and lie to win. We're not even playing the same game." He turned back, his fingers reaching for the door handle. "Knowledge is power, my friend. And sadly, at this point, you have very little of either." In Interlude of Intrigue, A Tale of Three Kings, is book 3.5 by Lesley Herron, a short novella to set the stage for the upcoming book 4 of the series. If you would like to listen to the first 3 books, please be sure to check the links in the description. And stay tuned every few weeks to hear the latest chapters as they are being written and recorded. We hope you enjoyed the story. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.